I was doing 6 hours a day. I got my own trainer on the side, and I trained with the film trainer, who's this insane mountain climber who it was his job to kill us.
Everyone remembers the powerful battle cry and unforgettable scenes from 300. But there was something hidden in the film that most viewers never noticed. For years, fans believed they understood the story behind the legendary Spartan epic. Now nearly 2 decades later, Gerard Butler is finally revealing a surprising truth about the movie. We all know in 2005, a turning point arrived in Butler's career when he was cast as the fierce Spartan ruler King Leonidas in the epic historical film 300. At the time, Butler was still working to establish himself as a leading man in Hollywood. Although he had appeared in several films and television projects, none had yet elevated him to true international stardom. The role of Leonidas, however, presented a rare opportunity, one that demanded both commanding screen presence and extraordinary physical commitment. The film was directed by visionary filmmaker Zack Snyder and adapted from the graphic novel created by Frank Miller. The story reimagined the ancient Greek conflict known as the Battle of Thermopylae, in which a small force of Spartan warriors stood against the vast army of the Persian Empire. At the heart of the story was Leonidas, the fearless king who led just 300 soldiers into what they knew would likely be a final heroic stand. For Butler, the moment he learned about the role, he understood that portraying Leonidas would require far more than simply delivering lines on screen. The character demanded an almost mythic level of strength, discipline, and authority. Butler reportedly threw himself into an intense physical training program that lasted months. The regimen included weightlifting, combat training, sword fighting practice, and strict dietary control in order to achieve the muscular battle-ready physique that would define the film's visual style. Yet, the preparation was not purely physical. Butler also worked to capture the emotional core of Leonidas, a leader willing to sacrifice everything for his people and his homeland. He studied the mentality of Spartan warriors, focusing on their values of honor, courage, and loyalty. This helped him bring depth to a character who could easily have been portrayed as simply a warrior king. When production began, Butler quickly became the emotional anchor of the film. His powerful delivery of lines and commanding presence gave the character an intensity that resonated with audiences. Although no one involved in the production could fully predict it at the time, 300 would eventually become a global box office success and a cultural phenomenon. The role of Leonidas ultimately transformed Butler's career. What began as a bold gamble became the performance that introduced him to millions of viewers worldwide and established him as one of Hollywood's most recognizable action stars. Also in 2005, long before filming began for the epic action film 300, Gerard Butler and the rest of the cast faced one of the most grueling preparation periods of their careers. To convincingly portray the legendary Spartan warriors, the actors were required to undergo a brutal training regimen that would transform their bodies and prepare them for the physical intensity of the story. The filmmakers wanted the warriors on screen to look authentically powerful, men who had been raised in a culture built around discipline, strength, and relentless combat training. Under the guidance of professional fitness trainers and stunt coordinators, Butler and his fellow actors entered a demanding program that lasted for several months. The training combined multiple elements, including heavy weightlifting, high-intensity interval workouts, martial arts drills, and endurance conditioning. Every day involved exhausting sessions designed not only to build muscle, but also to increase stamina and coordination. The goal was to ensure that when the actors stepped onto the set, they would move like real soldiers rather than performers pretending to fight. The program was famously intense. Actors often trained for hours each day, pushing their bodies to the limit through exercises such as tire flipping, sled pulling, kettlebell routines, pull-ups, and core strength circuits. In addition to building strength, they also practiced weapon techniques using swords and shields to mimic the battlefield tactics of ancient Sparta. The cast rehearsed choreographed combat sequences repeatedly until the movements appeared natural and fluid. Butler later recalled that the training was one of the most physically demanding challenges he had ever experienced. At times, exhaustion set in as the workouts became increasingly difficult, but quitting was never considered an option. The cast understood that the film's unique visual style depended heavily on their physical transformation. Because the Spartans in the story fought wearing minimal armor, their physiques would be fully visible on screen, leaving no room to hide a lack of preparation. The demanding schedule also required strict dietary discipline. Actors followed carefully controlled nutrition plans designed to maximize muscle growth while reducing body fat. Meals were planned around high-protein foods, complex carbohydrates, and rigorous hydration routines to support the extreme workouts. In addition, during the demanding production of 300 between 2005 and 2006, Gerard Butler experienced a frightening moment that revealed just how physically dangerous the filming process could be. The movie was famous for its intense combat scenes with actors performing complex battle choreography involving swords, shields, and close-quarters fighting. While the sequences were carefully planned and supervised by stunt professionals, the sheer energy and speed of the action sometimes created real risks. One of the most shocking incidents occurred while Butler was filming a fight scene as King Leonidas. During a particularly aggressive exchange of blows, a metal prop weapon accidentally struck him in the face. Although the weapon was designed for film use, the impact was still strong enough to cause a serious injury. Butler suffered a deep cut that required several stitches, forcing production to briefly pause while he received medical treatment. The accident highlighted the physical intensity behind the film's stylized action. Director Zack Snyder had envisioned battle scenes that would feel raw, powerful, and relentless, capturing the ferocity of the ancient warriors who fought in the legendary Battle of Thermopylae. To achieve that level of realism, the actors were expected to perform much of the combat choreography themselves rather than relying entirely on stunt doubles. Because of this approach, the cast had to move quickly and strike convincingly while coordinating their timing with multiple performers in a scene. Even with extensive rehearsals, mistakes could happen when weapons were swinging and bodies were moving at high speed. In Butler's case, a single miscalculated movement was enough to turn a staged fight into a painful accident. Despite the injury, Butler remained committed to the production. After receiving treatment and allowing the wound to be properly stitched, he returned to filming and continued performing many of the action scenes himself. The experience later became one of the many stories he shared about the demanding nature of making the film. By 2006, as production continued on the visually groundbreaking film 300, Gerard Butler and the rest of the cast found themselves working in an environment unlike anything most historical epics had used before. Rather than filming on vast outdoor sets filled with elaborate props and thousands of extras, director Zack Snyder chose a highly stylized approach that relied heavily on green screen technology and digital effects. Traditionally, large historical films recreated ancient settings with massive physical sets, real landscapes, and large groups of background performers. However, Snyder wanted 300 to visually resemble the graphic novel created by Frank Miller, whose artwork featured dramatic lighting, surreal colors, and exaggerated battle imagery. To achieve that unique look, most of the movie was filmed on soundstages surrounded by bright green screens. The digital backgrounds, including towering cliffs, stormy skies, and massive Persian armies, would be added later during post-production. For Butler and his fellow actors, performing in this environment was a strange and sometimes challenging experience. Instead of standing on realistic battlefields, they often found themselves surrounded by empty studio space with only a few props or partial set pieces. Large armies, enormous creatures, and sweeping landscapes existed only in the imagination of the performers while they delivered their lines and fought their choreographed battles. Butler later explained that this style of film-making required a different kind of acting discipline. The performers had to visualize scenes that were not physically present. When Leonidas stood defiantly before the Persian forces, Butler was often staring at blank green walls rather than an enormous enemy army. Likewise, moments that appeared to take place on dramatic mountain passes or vast battlefields were often filmed on small sections of constructed platforms. This unusual process demanded intense concentration and creativity from the actors. They needed to react emotionally to events that would only appear months later once digital artists completed the visual effects. To maintain realism in their performances, the cast relied heavily on detailed descriptions from the director and visual reference images showing what the final scenes would eventually look like. As filming moved deeper into 2006, Gerard Butler began to feel the growing pressure that came with portraying one of history's most legendary warriors. In the epic film 300, Butler was not simply playing another action hero. He was tasked with embodying King Leonidas, the fearless Spartan leader who stood against overwhelming odds during the legendary Battle of Thermopylae. The role required a commanding presence, unwavering confidence, and a level of emotional intensity that could make audiences believe they were watching a true warrior king. Director Zack Snyder envisioned Leonidas as the powerful center of the story, the man whose courage and determination inspired his soldiers to fight even when defeat seemed inevitable. Because of that, Butler carried much of the film's emotional weight. Every speech to the Spartan warriors, every confrontation with the Persian forces, and every moment of defiance had to feel authentic and powerful. One of the most famous moments in the film came when Leonidas confronted a Persian messenger demanding Sparta's surrender. In response, Butler delivered the now iconic line, "This is Sparta," before violently kicking the messenger into a deep pit. The scene became one of the most recognizable moments in modern action cinema, quoted and parodied countless times after the film's release. However, at the time of filming, Butler knew the scene had to be delivered with absolute conviction. If it felt forced or exaggerated, the moment could easily lose its dramatic impact. Butler later explained that performing such scenes required complete emotional commitment. Even though much of the set consisted of green screens and minimal physical scenery, he had to project the authority of a king addressing an entire nation. The actor focused on Leonidas's unwavering belief in Spartan values, honor, loyalty, and courage, and used that mindset to fuel his performance. The pressure was intensified by the physical exhaustion the cast endured during filming. After months of brutal training and long shooting days filled with combat choreography, Butler still had to deliver powerful speeches and maintain the fierce presence of a battle-hardened leader. Yet those challenges ultimately helped shape the intensity of his portrayal. In 2007, the release of 300 marked a dramatic turning point, not only for audiences who experienced its bold visual style, but also for the career of Gerard Butler. Before the film's premiere, few could have predicted just how powerful its impact would be. Although anticipation existed among fans of the graphic novel created by Frank Miller, the movie quickly exceeded expectations and became an international box office sensation.